It is the last week of the federal election campaign and things are getting a little bit personal. Erin O'Toole is taking a different tone when attacking Justin Trudeau. To discuss this in more detail is our political reporter joining us once again from Toronto, Brian Lilley. Now, Brian, what is this new approach that Mr. O'Toole is taking and what can we expect maybe for the rest of the campaign?
For the rest of the campaign, he's going to continue to make daily policy announcements, or at least that's what they'll be billed as. Uh, you know, uh, for example, he was talking about a tax credit for parents being paid out earlier on Monday. He was talking about daycare on Tuesday and so on. And then he spent most of his time on all of those days. He spent most of his time today saying Justin Trudeau should not be reelected. He, works in a couple of sentences about his policy announcement, but really it's all about Justin Trudeau should not be prime minister. He should not be rewarded for bad behavior. Now, this is not something we've seen from O'Toole before. He's always been critical of Trudeau, but it hasn't been his main focus. And what the Conservatives are trying to do is not only ensure that their supporters are motivated to go out and vote for the Conservatives or against Trudeau, but also try and demotivate Liberal voters who might hear what O'Toole's saying and say, as much as I don't like it and I won't vote for O'Toole, he's kind of right about Trudeau and I won't go out and vote for him. That's their goal with all of this. So just expect more negative attacks. It's, much what Trudeau has been doing to O'Toole, but this is new for him. He went as far as saying, while Trudeau was out partying, and we've all seen the pictures, I was doing search and rescue missions with the military. Things like that. That's the comparison he wants to draw. And also pointing out that he said in 2015, Justin Trudeau was about sunny ways. And while I may have disagreed with him, I could respect him. He asked, what would 2015 Justin think of the prime minister that we have now?
Yeah, that's very true, because back then I remember the Conservatives ran a very negative campaign. It was a lot of attack, and Trudeau says he took the high road. He's a lot more positive, and that seemed to resonate with voters at that point in time. Brian, speaking of Trudeau, he's not only been on the offensive attacking O'Toole, but also NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, and even our premiers here out west, including Jason Kenney and Scott Moe in Saskatchewan.
He's really attacking everybody. I mean, when he's either speaking in French or in Quebec, he's going after Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet. Why? He's been losing votes in Quebec to Blanchet. He's been losing votes in British Columbia and in parts of Ontario to the NDP. So he's going after Jagmeet Singh there. And it was bizarre to me, Hal, that when he really started going after Jason Kenney and Scott Moe, it's while he was campaigning in BC. BC for the last several elections has been a very tight race, and any three of the main parties can bubble up and be on top. And right now, what it looks like is the NDP has a slight edge in some polls, the Conservatives in a couple of others, but the Liberals are in third place in and around the mid to high 20s, while the Liberals or the Conservatives in the NDP are in the low to mid 30s. So he's trying to gain ground. When he won his majority in 2015, he took 17 seats in British Columbia. He's at about half of that right now, and he may end up losing more. So he's lashing out and trying to campaign in BC against Conservative premiers. Of course, they have an NDP government that at times has done worse than Alberta and Saskatchewan when handling COVID-19. But right now, they've gotten better because BC got really bad before Alberta did. So he's trying to play one off against the other and say, well, if you don't like COVID, you can't elect the Conservatives because look next door in Alberta, it's bad.
Creating a lot of division within our country. Now, Brian, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau says Conservative leader Erin O'Toole will put Canadians in danger because of O'Toole's gun policies. Now, Brian, you've actually looked at the stats, you've looked at the numbers, and doesn't it sound more like fear-mongering from Trudeau? In fact, is it not more the gang members and not law-abiding gun owners committing the gun crimes?
That is true right across the country. And I spoke this week to a guy named Suki Sandhu. He used to be an executive with the Liberals in British Columbia. He was on his local riding association. He was active in the party, voted in leadership conventions, all of that. And guess what? He now is looking at the Liberal platform on this issue and saying it leaves a lot to be desired. The reason he's so concerned is he lives in Surrey, British Columbia, a suburb of Vancouver that has a very high South Asian population and one that has seen a lot of South Asian youth get involved in gangs. This is a gang life activity like we see in cities across the country, but this one particularly ethnic focused. And he said, we're losing our youth and the government's not doing anything about it. In fact, he used some very strong language that I printed in the Toronto Sun that I won't say here to describe what he thinks Trudeau's doing with the fear mongering. You and I have talked about the numbers before, Hal. Shootings in Toronto alone, and I'm sorry, but Toronto's the only city in the country that updates its shooting numbers on a regular basis to the degree that they do here. Shootings in Toronto have nearly doubled since Justin Trudeau became prime minister. The percentage of murders since he became prime minister committed with a gun up 78%. You want to go back a decade, they're up 58% to one of the worst years in the Harper decade that he always talks about. So murders are up, shootings are up, people, having to deal with bullets flying into their car or through a window and narrowly missing them. In their innocent bystanders, all of that has gone up under Justin Trudeau, and yet he is making the claim that he's keeping Canadians safe because he's banning guns. Well, those guns, by the way, that he banned in May 2020, they are still in the gun safes of law-abiding, legal, RCMP vetted gun owners across the country. They haven't been used in crimes. Why? Because they're licensed, RCMP vetted, law-abiding gun owners.
Brian, former Liberal MP Jody Wilson-Raybould's new book is out. Interesting timing, just before the election here. Now, you've been reading it. How much will the release of this book really hurt Trudeau's campaign?
Well, I don't think it's going to shift 5, 10, 15 points from the Liberals off to other parties, but it could serve to dampen Liberal enthusiasm. And the Liberals don't have a lot of enthusiasm among their voting base right now, and they're down to their bare minimum core. So, yeah, it could cause problems. I mean, she goes over details about the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which, let's remind you, is all about the issue of a prime minister and those around him trying to get the attorney general to interfere in an independent criminal prosecution on corruption charges. This wasn't a change of policy, Hal. This wasn't the government saying in an election, well, we'll do this, and then they get in power and say, oh, that's not something we can do. We don't have the resources. No, this is interfering in a criminal trial that was all about corruption. That is an attack on fundamental justice. She details that. She showcases that the prime minister has quite the temper, that he's not the feminist that he claims to be. It's interesting reading. Look, Jody Wilson-Raybould and I do not agree on an awful lot of policy, but I have a lot of respect for her. I didn't agree with some of the policies she brought in as Attorney General on Indigenous issues. I think she's bang on in a lot of areas. She wrote this book. It's from a very personal point of view. Once I'm done reading it to report on it, I'm going to enjoy going back and reading it for pleasure, maybe once the election's done.
Now let's circle back to the SNC-Lavalin scandal for just a moment. The federal Tories have asked for a full investigation into the scandal by the RCMP and for Trudeau to release cabinet records to the police. But Brian, come on, realistically, will that happen?
Probably not. And this comes about because of the book. In the book, Wilson-Raybould says that as she was writing it, she was still under the impression and spoken to the RCMP because they've interviewed her that this was still an ongoing investigation. We know from the Ethics Commissioner investigation and from previous reporting on what the Mounties were looking into that the Trudeau government would not release documents. Now think about that, Hal. They will not give police documents related to an investigation into trying to interfere in a corruption trial. That if that happened in any other country, it would be front page, top of the newscast news every night. The Trudeau Liberals have somehow convinced the Ottawa Press Gallery that this is old news, and they did it a long time ago. And they find their people to go out and say, it's old news, move along. Trudeau was asked about this. Would you share the information? He said, I have no information to share with you. He was asked again directly, will you hand over the documents? He claimed that this had all been litigated. No, it hasn't. When you will not allow 9 different people with information to testify or speak to the police or hand over documents, we don't know the full story. That's what the Ethics Commissioner said. And if the RCMP were speaking, and I think they should, then that's what they would be telling Canadians as well.
Aaron O'Toole has been talking about his childcare policy this week, Brian, which favors giving more money to parents. He's also promising more money for Quebec, which already had a signed deal. So, I mean, is this special treatment to maybe buy more votes in La Belle Province?
Yes and no. Quebec has so far been the only province that said, hey, we signed a deal with the federal government. We demand that you follow up with that, that you don't scrap the deal. So O'Toole is talking about making sure that the province isn't left holding the bag on anything. If the premier of Saskatchewan, if Scott Moe went and said, okay, well, we signed a deal and you're going to scrap it and give out this tax credit, which gives parents the choice and allows them to decide what kind of childcare, then we want more in terms. O'Toole was asked about that, and he said, look, I'm here for a federalism of partnership, not a federalism of Ottawa knows best. So if he does get elected, and that's still a possibility at this point, if he does get elected and scraps those deals, I'm sure that there will be something in the works for the other provinces that signed on. And it may be more healthcare transfers or something else. In fact, the Ford government here in Ontario was very close to a deal before the election, but Trudeau called the election. And of course, those negotiations had to stop. Speaking with the senior Tory here, I said, well, what happens? I mean, will you guys be happy if they scrap what you'd worked on? And he said, well, we'll just get some kind of compensation on another matter. If you want to keep premiers happy and your prime minister, there's one way to do it, Hal. Give them money. And I don't think that this will just be a special deal for Quebec. I think that all the provinces that ask for it will get something if O'Toole is elected and scraps these childcare deals.
Always follow the money. Brian, Justin Trudeau has been attacked on social media calling himself a Quebecer. But Brian, Mr. Trudeau was in fact born and raised in Ottawa, was he not? While Mr. O'Toole, on the other hand, was born in Montreal.
Aaron O'Toole was born in Montreal, but he moved to Ontario as a young man with his father, so he was still a child, and spent a lot of his formative years just outside of Toronto, near the Oshawa area, where General Motors used to have a plant and where his father worked. Justin Trudeau was born in Ottawa, at the Ottawa Hospital, I believe, and was raised at 24 Sussex, which last time I checked was still in Ontario. He went to school in Ontario until his later high school years. I think it was about 14 or so, 13, 14, when he finally moved to Quebec. He did several years of high school and graduated from high school there, but he also did university studies in British Columbia. So the idea that he's some pure lang Quebecer, yeah, his dad is absolutely from Quebec. His family has deep roots in Quebec, but his mother's from British Columbia, and passably bilingual, perhaps. So it's an odd thing that Justin Trudeau plays up, but he plays it up for votes. He can decide if he's a Quebecer or he's not, but it is just odd to see him beat his chest on that. Of course, trying to show that you're a true Quebecer and love Quebec is in vogue right now because they're battling for votes there, especially after the English debate and the controversy around that question.
Many of the mainstream media have been reporting that Maxime Bernier's party, the PPC, has gone from a fringe party to a fourth-place party, Brian. With the popularity of the PPC, will that actually cost Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives at the ballot box?
It could, but let's face it, the PPC has been drawing from a number of parties. And another reason that they're in fourth place instead of fifth is that the Green Party has been setting itself on fire. The Green Party used to poll at around 4, 5, sometimes 7% in elections. And some polls have them down at 3%. Anna May Paul's probably not going to win her seat because they've been infighting. They only just allowed their leader to leave Toronto and go to PEI for their first campaign stop the other day. Bernier, meanwhile, has been touring the country. He's been doing well in Alberta. I'd be surprised if he won a seat in Alberta because the Conservatives are still so strong there. But he's also showing up well in some polls in Atlantic Canada. There's talk that Bernier is within striking distance of winning back his old seat. Could they win a seat? That depends on whether people actually show up. Remember, last election, he was polling between 4 and 5%. He got 1.6. This time, he's between 3 and 7%, depending on the poll. Most are 5 and below. So, will all those people show up? If they do, there's a chance he could get a seat or two, but he's far off way from forming government at this point. But better off than when he started the election campaign.
Now, there have been huge turnouts with the advance polls here in the West, Brian. Oftentimes, that's indicative of voter anger and wanting a change of the current government. What are you seeing right now when it comes to the polls?
Well, I've talked to MPs in different ridings across the country, and several of them have told me that they've far surpassed the 2019 advance polls. So this is a different election, though, Hal. We've got the mail-in ballots, which it's going to be less than a million. If they crack a million, it will be a late push, and I'd be shocked. So less than a million. They were expecting between 2 and 5 million people to request those. But the advance polls are up in part because there are still many Canadians concerned about voting in a pandemic election. They don't want to stand in line. And yet, funny enough, what did we hear on the first day of advance voting last week? Lines on Friday. Those had mostly dissipated by Saturday and Sunday, but still, candidates across the country telling me that yes, they had seen increased turnout. So, will that also happen next election day, Monday? It's going to be difficult to tell. We had just over 18 million votes cast last election in 2019. We'll have to top that. By the way, the Trudeau Liberals lost almost 900,000 last election. We'll see if they continue that slide after having the highest number ever vote for a party, and that was the Liberals in 2015.
Looking forward to September 20th. Should make for some very interesting times. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.